rolling out real soon.
Yeah, there was a lot of lessons learned from the Polaris Dawn mission with the SpaceX EVA suits that we've translated to the IVA suits. So Mike Fink is the first one to wear the upgraded one, but then Crew-12 is actually expected to wear all of the new designed suits. So that's pretty exciting.
It will be exciting, and we are just moments away from that communications blackout, about 10 seconds until that is underway. And so again, we are expecting that communications blackout to begin here, and it'll last approximately 7 minutes due to plasma formation around the spacecraft. And during this blackout, no vehicle telemetry is received by Mission Control, which you're seeing a live view of Mission Control on your screen, or by the recovery team, which is staged out off the coast of San Diego, California. And no external commanding of the vehicle or voice communication is possible.
And as a reminder, Dragon is designed to fly itself, so during reentry, the vehicle will be slowing down from orbital velocity, which is approximately 17,500 miles per hour. The top temperature Dragon will experience upon reentry is 3,500 degrees Fahrenheit, which is really hot. The blackout period is expected to last about 7 minutes. Again, it has begun at 8:20 a.m. this morning. Again, expected to be complete at 8:27 a.m. And we're not going to hear any comms right now because we know that we have a loss of signal at this moment, but at the expected 8:27 a.m. time frame, we'll start to hear some comms from the core to the crew, checking in to see if they have acquired the acquisition of signal again.
And during that 7-minute comms blackout is also when the entry phase begins. So that is expected to begin about a minute from now at 8:22 a.m. Pacific, 11:22 a.m. Eastern time. And so things will be really ramping up. Again, during re-entry, the vehicle will be slowing down from its orbital velocity, which is approximately 17,500 miles per hour. And the top temperature that Dragon will experience during that re-entry is about 3,500 degrees Fahrenheit.
Yeah, and we do have windows on Dragon, so the crew, at least the two passengers next to the windows, are going to get to see that plasma buildup, which we've heard is a great view of all the different colors that the plasma creates as it's coming back through the Earth's atmosphere.
And so on the bottom left-hand side of your screen, you can actually see some of the vehicle data. So then once we have the signal reacquired, that will update a little bit. But before that re-entry, they were at an altitude of about 82.5 kilometers. So continuing to come back down again as the International Space Station itself. So when it was docked, it was at about 260 statute miles above Earth's atmosphere.
And less than 11 minutes until splashdown of the Crew-10 crew. And again, they're currently in a blackout period, so we're not going to have any visuals. We're not going to have any comms for a few more minutes. We're about 2 minutes into the blackout period, about 5 minutes left.
Or right after that splashdown, a lot of things will happen in rapid succession. So it takes about 45 minutes from splashdown until the boat is fully onto the recovery boat, the Shannon, which is staged out in San Diego, California. And then after it is hoisted up onto the boat, the hatch will be opened and we will welcome Crew-10 back aboard the boat, and they will begin those medical checkouts and evaluations before they are flown back to shore off the coast of California, and then from there they will be prepared to fly back to Houston and begin their full recovery and be greeted by friends and family. And so we're now a little over 3 minutes into the communications blackout, about 4 minutes to go. The vehicle should be experiencing that entry phase right about now. Once we have that communications back, we'll have those initial comm checks, and about 2 minutes after we reacquire that signal, we do expect the drogue parachutes to deploy, followed in rapid succession by the main parachutes deploying. Again, that will slow the vehicle down even further to about 16 miles per hour at the time of splashdown. Again, we are less than 10 minutes away from that targeted splashdown, expecting it around 8:33 a.m. Pacific, 11:33 a.m. Eastern.
And the really cool part about the Dragon spacecraft is we're actually utilizing the Earth's atmosphere, that re-entry, to help slow the velocity of the vehicle significantly from 17,500 miles per hour down to about 350 miles per hour is when the drogue parachutes will deploy. And then after the main chutes are deployed, by the time that the vehicle splashes down onto the water, it's about 16 miles per hour. So really, really slow compared to how fast they've been moving for the last 5 months.
And then once they splash down, it's pretty quick. Those initial 2 fast boats will get out there within moments, a minute or 2 after splashdown, and they will conduct those initial safety checks. So they will screen for hypergol and make sure everything is okay for the recovery teams to approach. Some of the teams will also then get onto the spacecraft and begin safing it and prepare it to lift up onto the boat. And other teams will be working on the parachutes and gathering those up. Again, we are about 2 minutes away from the expected acquisition of signal. That initial loss of signal took place about 5 minutes ago during that reentry phase as a result of all the plasma buildup. Again, it's completely expected, and it happens during every reentry of a spacecraft from its journey in space. Again, Crew-10 is returning after an about 5-month science and research mission aboard the International Space Station. They initially launched aboard a Falcon 9 rocket out at Kennedy Space Center in Florida on March 14th, and then docked shortly after that to the International Space Station. They spent 5 months doing all of that science and research, and then they undocked yesterday at 3:15 p.m. Pacific, 6:15 p.m. Eastern Time to set them up for today's re-entry and splashdown. And we are expecting that acquisition of signal to take place about 90 seconds from now, so a little bit more than a minute to go until we hear those call-ups from the core to the crew to check back in with them, and less than 7 minutes to go until we have splashdown.
Yeah, it's getting very exciting here. I'm sure the crew is very excited to make it back home to planet Earth.
And there on your screen on the bottom left, you can actually see the telemetry catching back up.
You see them getting very close to the coast of California.
Dragon, SpaceX, comm check.
SpaceX Dragon, we have you loud and clear.
I have you the same, Dragon. Expect automated chute deployment.
Dragon copies.
And so we did just hear that call up from the core, the crew operations resource engineer here in SpaceX Mission Control, to the Crew-10 astronauts currently aboard Dragon. Confirmation that we have reacquired signal with the Dragon spacecraft, and you can see that the speed is rapidly slowing down as it begins its final phase, and we will have confirmation of those parachutes deploy in just a few moments.
Yeah, you can also see the altitude in the bottom left-hand corner. You can see it getting closer and closer back down to Earth.
GPS converge. Expect nominal altitude for drogue chute deployment.
And the core just informing the crew of what's going on. They're going to be feeling a lot of different things inside of the spacecraft where they can't see what's going on outside. So they will expect the drogue parachutes to deploy, so they'll know what that feeling is inside of the spacecraft. And again, you can follow along the altitude in the bottom left-hand corner as the crew is getting closer and closer to planet Earth.
And we are expecting those drogue parachutes to deploy a little bit after 8:29 a.m. Pacific, 11:29 a.m. Eastern.
And the crew there on your screen rotating in their seats in preparation for that splashdown. During that reentry, they are leaning more on their backs, but when they are coming in for splashdown, they can sit a little bit more upright in preparation for that touchdown.
And on your screen from left to right is Roscosmos cosmonaut Kirill Peskov, NASA astronaut Nicole Ayers.
Brace for drogue window.
NASA astronaut Anne McClain and JAXA astronaut Takuya Onishi. Again, they are getting prepared for that drogue deploy, which should be happening in just a few moments from now. Again, we expect that a little bit after 8:29 a.m. Pacific, 11:29 a.m. Eastern, and it will be followed shortly thereafter by the main parachutes deploying. And there you're seeing a live look as from the recovery team, a helicopter that has a camera tracking the spacecraft during its reentry. We do have confirmation that the drogue deploy is underway.
There are those two drogue
Visual and
shoots.
2 healthy drogues.
Copy healthy drogues. Copy healthy drogues.
And a great live view from the spacecraft itself, seeing those two healthy drogues deployed.
And the spacecraft has now slowed down to less than 200 kilometers per hour, and it is now just over 2 kilometers above the water as it prepares for splashdown, and we should have that main parachute deploy in just a few moments to continue slowing the spacecraft down to about 16 miles per hour at the time of splashdown.
There's the main chutes deployed. They're going to open up here shortly.
Main chute descent rate nominal.
And we do have confirmation and a visual
Dragon
view.
copies. Dragon copies.
1,000 meters. 1,000 meters.
And
We copy 1,000 meters.
And there's a great look of the Dragon Endurance spacecraft as it makes its way to its splashdown site off the coast of California under those 4 main parachutes that have now deployed and about 900 meters away from the water surface.
Dragon, 800 meters. Dragon, 800 meters.
800 meters.
Crew monitoring their altitude as they make their way to splashdown. And I love these daytime views that we get. We don't always get to pick the time when the crew splashes down, but it's awesome when we have a great morning and a clear view watching as the Dragon Endurance spacecraft carrying Crew-10 is...
SpaceX Dragon, 600 meters. SpaceX Dragon, 600 meters.
I copy 600 meters.
Crew just 600 meters away from splashdown.
And just over a minute away from that targeted splashdown time, again expected around 8:33 a.m. Pacific, 11:33 a.m. Eastern. Now about 500 meters away from the surface of the water. And slowed down to about 35 kilometers per hour. Again, it'll continue to slow down.
SpaceX Dragon, 400 meters. SpaceX Dragon, 400 meters. Splashdown. Brace for splashdown.
SpaceX copies 400 meters and crew are braced for splashdown.
And we just saw an incredible view there of the Dragon as it re-entered under some cloud cover. And we should be regaining some of those live views from the recovery zone momentarily as it gets resituated to capture the return. The spacecraft is now about 200 meters above the ocean and it has slowed down to about 30 kilometers per hour. Again, it will continue to slow down until about 16 kilometers per hour. And there we can see another live look of the Dragon Endurance spacecraft carrying Crew-10 back home to Earth following their 5-month mission, moments away from splashdown.
SpaceX Dragon, splashdown. SpaceX Dragon, happy sailors.
SpaceX copies splashdown.
And we did just hear that confirmation of splashdown. The view that you're seeing on your screen is a little bit delayed, which is why we don't have that visual confirmation yet, but we do have that verbal confirmation between the crew and the Corps that they have successfully splashed down and Dragon Endurance has now returned home. And there is that live look of Dragon Endurance as it sits on top of the ocean off the coast of San Diego, California.
Dragon, SpaceX, we see the onboard for Power 1 28-volt converter. No crew action required at this time. Stand by for more words.
Dragon copies, no crew action on the caution. Dragon copies, no crew action on the caution.
Dragon Endurance has now returned home, and NASA astronauts Anne McClain, Nicole Ayers, JAXA astronaut Takuya Onishi,
and SpaceX Dragon for step 1.2 and SpaceX Dragon for step 1.2 4 fired. 800, we see 4 fired.
and
Dragon, we see the same.
And Roscosmos cosmonaut Kirill Peskov are back on Earth after an approximately 17.5-hour return journey from space, completing their 5-month mission aboard the International Space Station.
The SpaceX recovery ship and team has been waiting for Dragon splashdown, and they will now start to make their way to the splashdown location. The teams have been ready and waiting about 3 nautical miles away, so it's going to take them about 30 minutes to make their way to Anne, Nicole, Takuya, and Kirill inside of Dragon.
And so we did have splashdown happen on time at 8:33 a.m. Pacific, 11:33 a.m. Eastern off the coast of San Diego, California. And so we are eagerly awaiting that recovery. There are a few steps that take place before the crew can exit the spacecraft. First, those fast boats will go out to the recovery location to conduct some initial safety checks, test for hypergol, and ensure that everything is safe and ready for the recovery teams to approach, and then proceed through those following steps to get the capsule back onto the recovery boat, the Shannon. And so the Shannon will make its way out to the specific recovery location. It takes about 30 minutes for it to get out there. So by the time the safety and hypergol checks.
3.1 are upright, stable 1.
We copy Stable 1. On behalf of SpaceX, welcome home. 50 system safety verifications are in progress. I will report back when recovery personnel are en route.
SpaceX Dragon, entire Crew-10. Thank you for that flight. Truly an honor of a lifetime. That last 20 minutes. I think 20 minutes. Carnival ride. We get back the line and go again. And go again. Thanks for the safe landing. We'll see you shortly.
And so you did just hear some congratulatory words between the SpaceX teams here in Mission Control and Hawthorne, as well as NASA astronaut Anne McClain, who is the commander of Crew-10, so exchanging those celebratory words as they are now successfully and safely back on planet Earth following their mission aboard the International Space Station. And for those of you who are just joining us, this mission has gone smoothly so far, and Dragon successfully splashed down off the coast of San Diego, California at 8:33 a.m. Pacific, 11:33 a.m. Eastern, just about 5 minutes ago.
Approximately 17.5 hours prior to splashdown, Dragon autonomously undocked from the International Space Station, completed a series of departure burns, jettisoned its trunk section, and performed its final burn, the deorbit burn, to place itself on a trajectory towards San Diego, California. Dragon successfully re-entered the Earth atmosphere, followed by deployment of its parachutes to slow the spacecraft down to a gentle splashdown. And we'll now follow the final part of Anne, Nicole, Takuya, and Kirill's journey as Dragon is lifted out of the water and placed onto the recovery boat.
And upon detection of landing, Dragon does automatically release the main parachutes to prevent wind from pulling the spacecraft. And then Dragon automatically safes any pyrotechnics still present on the vehicle and may automatically perform additional minor system reconfigurations. The astronauts do remain seated and in their suits at this point, but the onboard air conditioning keeps things temperate inside the spacecraft, and the communication systems on board remain powered so the crew can continue to communicate.
Now, SpaceX has 2 fast boats in the recovery fleet, which have moved quickly to the splashdown point. And you can see one of them there on your screen next to the Dragon Endurance spacecraft. They are being followed by one of the main recovery vessels, which will move into position upon upwind of the spacecraft. The 2 fast boats have very specific roles. The first approach is focused on immediate safety inspection of the spacecraft integrity and checking for any presence of hypergolic propellant vapors, ensuring that it's safe for the recovery vessel to approach Dragon. Now, once Dragon is cleared for full approach, the team begins rigging the spacecraft for water recovery by the recovery ship. The second fast boat is responsible for parachute recovery and also serves as a redundant boat to the first. And we'll see a team member on a jet ski soon helping to gather up the detached parachutes.
And it does take about 10 minutes for the recovery crew to complete their safety checks. And then once complete, the team will begin preparing Dragon to be lifted onto the recovery vessel, the Shannon, today. As part of the preparation for this lift, one member of the recovery team will climb on top of the spacecraft so they can attach Dragon's hoist rings and connect the lifting lines. It will take less than an hour to raise Dragon to the recovery boat and remove the crew from the spacecraft. After those initial medical checkouts, the crew will return to land within 4 hours by helicopter, and if no additional medical assistance is needed, the crew will then board a waiting NASA plane and depart for Houston and make their way home. And so just about 7 minutes ago, Dragon Endurance did return home, and NASA astronauts Anne McClain, Nicole Ayers, along with JAXA astronaut Takuya Onishin and Roscosmos cosmonaut Kirill Peskov, are back on Earth after an approximately 17.5-hour journey from space.
SpaceX recovery ship and team has been waiting for Dragon splashdown, and they're now currently making their way to the splashdown location. The teams have been ready and waiting.
Dragon, SpaceX, we are go for recovery personnel to approach the capsule. Expect fast boats alongside in about 1 minute.
Copy 1 minute. Copy, you guys are on it. Thanks. You guys are on it. Thanks.
And so we did just hear confirmation that the recovery boats, or the fast boats, have been given the confirmation to proceed. So those recovery steps will soon commence. Again, it takes about 10 minutes for all those safety checks to be completed. And we actually have a team member out on the recovery boat who we will be hearing from momentarily to get her perspective. And so joining us from the recovery vessel is NASA Public Affairs Officer Reagan Scharfetter, who had a first-hand view of the crew returning and splashing down. Reagan, can you hear us? And how was the view from the recovery vessel?
Hey there, Anna and Jesse. How do you hear me?
We hear you loud and clear.
Awesome. Well, seeing splashdown firsthand was a moment I assume others on board will play back for the rest of time. We were stationed within 1.5 nautical miles from the splashdown zone off the coast of San Diego and had fairly decent visuals from the Shannon recovery vessel. The cloud ceiling is actually higher than originally forecasted at around 1,100 feet, which gave us a little more room to see the Dragon spacecraft coming in on this misty morning. Even with these cloudy skies, though, we were able to witness the 4 white and orange main parachutes before Endurance descended down into the Pacific Ocean. And now we're just eagerly awaiting our Crew-10 members to join us on the ship very soon.
That's very exciting, Reagan. I'm so happy that you have that firsthand perspective. You mentioned the cloud cover a little bit, but overall, how have the landing conditions been from your perspective?
The landing conditions were nominal this morning and within limits in regard to sea state, winds, and cloud ceiling. There was also some excitement earlier on board when we spotted not only whales, but also a pot of dolphins and a shark out on our starboard side. Currently, it's about 66 degrees out with 5 mile-per-hour winds and what has been described as a pretty mild sea for the ship, but what could be more of a rougher ride for the capsule itself. Irregardless, after spending 146 days aboard the International Space Station, I think this crew is going to be more than thrilled with this fun reintroduction to the planet.
We're going to have to keep our eyes peeled for some whales over here, I guess. But can you tell us a little bit about the recovery journey to get to this point?
Yeah, absolutely. One standout part of this recovery is that Crew-10 actually marked the first crewed
Dragon,
NASA mission.
SpaceX, hypergol sweeps and unfired ordnance checks are nominal. Rigging is in progress. Approximately 5 minutes until capsule lift. We have flight surgeons standing by. Please confirm crew are ready for PMC.
Copy 5 minutes. Copy 5 minutes to lift. Cruise.
We did just hear some communication there, about 25 minutes to
Copy,
lift.
Dragon. The next call you hear will be from Flight Surgeon on Dragon to Ground Private.
Dragon copies.
And you can see that view there of the two fast boats and that rigging underway. Reagan, do we still have you? Do you want to continue on about the recovery journey to get to this point?
Yes, absolutely. As I was saying, one standout part of this recovery is that Crew-10 marks the first crewed NASA mission to return to the Pacific Ocean since 1975. That's 50 years ago when the Apollo-Soyuz mission ended. The landing zone shift from the Gulf and Atlantic sites shows the commercial crew program's continued flexibility and adaptations to mission needs, but this doesn't go without paying attention to new perspective challenges like marine layer and visibility issues, as well as some rubber sea states, which we are getting a slight taste of today. These are also conditions the Artemis II recovery team will be tracking ahead of their mission next year, which too will conclude with a splashdown off the Pacific coast. For today's operations, though, we started the morning by flying a series of helicopters out to the vessel. The recovery director and crew support teams were on the first flight out to help get the ship ready. And about 2 hours before splashdown, 2 fast boats and a jet ski were then placed into the water. I was on the second helicopter out here and landed on the ship
Dragon,
about 90.
SpaceX ComCheck.
SpaceX Dragon, we have you loud and clear.
Copy, Dragon. I have you loud and clear with a slight echo. For your awareness, we're going to step into transitioning the forward link now. COM will be unavailable for approximately 5 minutes.
Dragon copies.
And we did just hear those comm checks, and we have heard that the crew has reported that they're feeling well following their splashdown. Reagan, go ahead and tell us about your helicopter ride out to the recovery zone.
Yes, as I was saying, I was on the second helicopter out here and landed on the ship about 90 minutes before splash. And I just have to say, I have never seen an execution quite like this before. Teams have been working nonstop across various disciplines all week in lockstep with each other, just making sure that every detail was in place for Crew-10's successful return.
That's incredible, Reagan. So what's next for retrieving the crew?
Up next, Endurance will be hoisted onto the vessel and pulled toward the egress platform on Dragon Nest at the aft end of the ship. Safety checks will then be performed before opening the side hatch to ensure there are no hypergolic vapors present. And once confirmed, NASA and SpaceX medical personnel will assist the crew out of the capsule one by one. Once the crew exits the capsule, they'll undergo medical evaluations in the med bay, and soon after that, they'll board the first helicopter out, head to the airport, and then take a NASA plane back to Houston to begin their post-flight activities. I will say, as a first-timer out here, it's important to mention that seeing a spacecraft-shaped comet shoot down from the sky has just been an incredible joy to experience. And I know I can speak for the rest of the ship when I say that it's even more exciting to be able to welcome home Anne, Nicole, Jakuya, and Kirill. In the meantime, though, we'll keep you updated every step of the way out here. And with that, I will send it back to you guys out in Hawthorne.
Thank you so much, Reagan. It's incredible to hear your point of view and your perspective from the recovery ship, the Shannon, an invaluable point of view to have for today's broadcast. Towards the end of Reagan's comments, she did actually mention the Dragon Nest, where Dragon will be hoisted up onto, and you can see a little bit of a live view there on the edge of your screen. So that is where Dragon will lift up onto once it's ready, and then once it's safely there, we'll actually move inward a little bit. And then from there, the hatches will be opened and the crew will be extracted out. During the extraction of the crew, they are typically assisted, and that's completely normal. And that's completely normal during these operations. Again, they have been in the microgravity environment for about 5 months. And so some reconditioning needs to take place to reacclimate themselves to Earth's gravity.
And this is a view from the recovery vessel, but we did see the recovery teams preparing.
Dragon, SpaceX, forward link transition complete, comm check.
Dragon, we have you clear with a slight echo.
Dragon, we have you the same without an echo.
Sounds like they are trying to...
Copy. Echo but readable.
Trying to update the comms link, as we did hear an echo from the Crew-10 crew as they were talking to the core. But now it sounds like we may have reversed the echo, where we're not hearing it any longer, but the crew is now hearing the core on an echo. So I'm sure they're going to continue to troubleshoot that to get some clear comms during these last few moments of recovery. Currently, Crew-10 is still inside of Dragon, still in the ocean, waiting to be lifted onto the recovery ship. The recovery team is rigging up the spacecraft in preparation for that lift, basically adding the straps necessary to lift Dragon out of the water, which will be lifted with the hydraulic lift on the recovery ship, and then into that nest that we were seeing earlier. Then they'll translate to that deck that we saw on the recovery vessel. And then finally, the hatch will open. They'll take their first breath of fresh air in a little under 5 months.
And so you are seeing a live look inside the SpaceX Mission Control here in Hawthorne. As soon as we have good views of the recovery again, we will, of course, share those with you. Sometimes the cameras and the equipment out there just has to be restationed to get some better views during these recovery operations. So again, the crew did splash down aboard the Dragon Endurance spacecraft at 8:33 a.m. Pacific, 11:33 a.m. Eastern, a little under 20 minutes ago. And so it does take about 30 minutes until the recovery ship fully arrives out there, and that's also around the time that that rigging of the Dragon capsule will be complete. So a little bit after 9 a.m., we should see that rigging fully completed, the recovery vessel right up next to Dragon and being prepared for that hoist. And you can see that live look there of the recovery ship, the Shannon, which has made its way out to the splashdown zone. And you can see Dragon Endurance spacecraft, which currently has the Crew-10 astronauts seated inside as they get closer and closer to each other to prepare for that lift onto the recovery ship. And again, this splashdown took place off the coast of San Diego, California today. It was the first West Coast splashdown and recovery of a NASA crew, and the last crewed recovery for a SpaceX mission was Axiom Mission 4 just last month.
And again, we are in the Pacific Ocean at this moment, but the last NASA crew, Crew-9, splashed down off the coast of Florida. They had some dolphins to greet them. It sounds like from Reagan's point of view, they saw some whales, some dolphins, even a shark out there. So we got a lot of sea members waiting for this crew to come back home.
Giving them a warm greeting back to Earth with the animals that are only here.
Dragon, SpaceX, rigging complete, approximately 5 minutes until capsule lift.
SpaceX Dragon came in broken and did not catch the second half. Understand rigging is complete.
5 minutes until capsule lift.
Copy, 5 minutes.
And for those of you who are just joining us, the Crew-10 members comprise of NASA astronauts Anne McClain and Nicole Ayers, alongside JAXA astronaut Takuya Onishi and Roscosmos cosmonaut Kirill Peskov, safely splashed down off the coast of San Diego, California about 20 minutes ago at 8:33 a.m. Pacific, 11:33 a.m. Eastern Time. And right now you are seeing a live look from the recovery boat, the Shannon, which is preparing to hoist Dragon up onto the Dragon nest, which you are seeing there on your screen. And then from there, they will continue preparation to open the hatch and welcome the Crew-10 crew back onto Earth as they take their first breath of fresh air after 5 months aboard the International Space Station as part of Expedition 73.
We did hear a call that lift is under 5 minutes away, and you could see the recovery teams as they're rigging up the spacecraft, getting ready to hoist it up. And you could see a recovery team member standing on the outside of the Dragon spacecraft, helping to prepare the vehicle for that lift.
And as part of the preparation for the lift, one of those recovery team members, likely the one we're seeing on the spacecraft right now, will climb to the top of the spacecraft so that they can attach Dragon's hoist rings and connect the lifting lines. So recovering a spacecraft is a very complex operation. And so there's a lot of teams involved. And of course, since it is splashing down in the ocean, they do issue some notices to mariners to make sure that the area is clear. And we work closely with the United States Coast Guard to ensure the safety of not only the recovery team and the crew, but as well as other people that may be out in the Pacific Ocean today.
Yeah, we've made sure that this area is clear for these final operations, as it does take some time after splashdown to prepare the spacecraft, safe the spacecraft, prepare the spacecraft for lifting onto the vehicle, making sure that the recovery teams are safe. Once they lift the spacecraft onto the deck or into that, what we call the Dragon's nest on the recovery ship, they'll also continue to do some safety checks to make sure that the thrusters on the Dragon spacecraft don't have any more gases leaking from them, and then they'll cover those up. Again, continuing to prioritize safety first as we get the Crew-10 crew ready to exit or egress the Dragon spacecraft.
And so that whole recovery process from splashdown to getting the crew out of the capsule takes less than an hour. So we should expect to see the crew and their smiling faces in hopefully about 30 minutes or less from now. Again, they splashed down a little less than 30 minutes ago at 8:33 a.m. Pacific, 11:33 a.m. Eastern off the coast of San Diego, California. This followed a 17.5-hour phasing journey following their departure and undocking from the International Space Station yesterday, August 8th at 3:15 p.m. Pacific, 6:15 p.m. Eastern. And so you can see that line that is connected from the recovery ship onto Dragon as it tugs its way in, and that recovery crew member making its way to the top of the Dragon Endurance spacecraft. And again, that recovery member is up there as part of the preparation for the lifting of the spacecraft onto the recovery vessel. They are there so that they can physically attach.
Brace for capsule lift.
Still think that's one of the best jobs.
Copy, cruise brace.
So they have physically attached those hoist rings and connected the lifting lines, and now they are preparing to lift the Dragon Endurance spacecraft onto the Shannon recovery boat momentarily. And you did just see that live look of the recovery member as he jumped off of the spacecraft and into the Pacific Ocean and is now back on one of the fast boats. And those fast boats were some of the initial recovery ships or recovery vehicles out at the splashdown location.
And again, we heard those comms to the crew, notifying them to prepare for the lift. Again, they can't see very much outside of the spacecraft, so knowing what operations are happening helps them understand what those moves that they're feeling are, so they know what to expect.
And once they begin that lift, it takes less than 10 minutes or so for it to be completed. And so it'll be safely inside that basket there at the end of the ship, where the dragon's egg, or dragon's nest is what it's known as. And then about 10 minutes or so from then, it'll be ready for hatch open. And you do see that lift is now underway as the Dragon Endurance spacecraft makes its way onto the recovery ship, the Shannon, that is staged off the coast of San Diego, California, following splashdown of the Dragon Endurance and the Crew-10 astronauts currently aboard.
And as this is happening, the crew is still strapped in to their seats with the 5-point harnesses. And they'll remain strapped in through the translation of the spacecraft to the deck and until the medical officer actually greets them. Then they will begin to unbuckle themselves and start egressing the spacecraft.
And so Dragon will remain in the nest during the crew extraction and then for the journey back to port. So that lift of the Dragon Endurance spacecraft just happened.
Stand by for translation to egress platform.
Dragon copies.
And so that lift of the Dragon Endurance spacecraft is now complete. You can see it there on your screen safely in the nest on the recovery ship. And so that translation to bring it forward and closer into the ship to then prepare to open the hatches will begin momentarily. You can see some of the crew member or the recovery members there doing their final inspections and safety checks of the spacecraft before they begin that translation. And then once that translation of the spacecraft is complete on the SpaceX recovery ship, the hatches will be opened. And we do expect that to take place probably in about 10 to 15 minutes from now. And once open, a SpaceX medical doctor will be the first one to check in on Ann McClain, Nicole Ayers, Takuya Onishi, and Kirill Peskov and see if they are ready for egress or getting out of the spacecraft. And while Dragon's top hatch is used to connect to the space station, the astronauts will actually egress or exit from Dragon's side hatch, pending capsule orientation in the water. Of course, we did see that it splashed down in orientation 1, so that the nose cone was facing up, which is the preferred orientation. And so before opening the hatch, the spacecraft's cabin pressure must be equalized with the outside environment. And then once the hatch is open, that will be the crew's first breath of fresh air since boarding their spacecraft at the start of their journey last March. Again, they lifted off from NASA's Kennedy Space Center in Florida on March 14th of this year.
And it's important to note that Anne, Nicole, Takuya, and Kirill will be getting assistance from the recovery teams while exiting the spacecraft. This is the same process for any returning long-duration crew members, as returning to a gravity environment can wreak havoc with our vestibular system, responsible for maintaining balance and motion. Safety is our #1 priority with this operation, so you'll see the crew members helped out of the spacecraft one by one and assisted the few feet to the medical quarters aboard the boat.
And if you've ever watched crews return on a Soyuz, 2 of our crew members today had actually previously flown on a Soyuz, Ann McClain and Takuya Onishi. This is the same process as when astronauts are carried from the Soyuz capsule to waiting chairs on the steppe of Kazakhstan and then carried to a waiting medical tent. This is also the period where any time-critical cargo can be recovered from the spacecraft, with the remainder waiting until the ship is back in port.
And once the ship and spacecraft return to shore, the recovery team will perform additional inspections before loading Dragon onto a flatbed truck at the SpaceX facility in Cape Canaveral for post-processing.
And so we mentioned earlier all of the science and research that Crew-10 conducted during their 5-month mission aboard the International Space Station. So in addition to some of the physical and biological science experiments that they conduct, they too themselves are human research subjects. So a lot of teams work to gather samples from the crew throughout their mission to see how the microgravity environment of space actually impacts the human body. So NASA does have the Human Research Program, which is responsible for a lot of that science and investigation. But of course, there's also researchers outside of NASA that use the microgravity environment aboard the International Space Station to conduct their science and research. We do have the International Space Station National Laboratory that helps to facilitate a lot of that other research as well.
And those research experiments, especially with the human body, are extremely important, especially for, we call these long duration missions 5 to 6 months long, but if we're going to be going to the moon, planets like Mars, we're going to need to stay a lot longer, and we're going to need to know how to keep the human body healthy throughout that time. What happens in these microgravity environments, and how can we better prepare the humans for going on these even longer duration missions.
So the International Space Station does serve as sort of a testing and proving ground for NASA's future Artemis missions to the moon and then on to Mars. Of course, we can't necessarily do all science and research in the microgravity environment due to various factors. So teams on the ground also do what are known as analog research experiments. Also, a lot of that is based out of our human research program. So one of those, known as the Human Exploration Research Analog, or HERA, does some isolation and confinement research inside of an analog setup that's supposed to simulate a spacecraft. Another one of those analogs is known as CHAPEA, or the Crew Health and Exploration Research Analog, which actually simulates a stay on the surface of Mars for about a year. So while this International Space Station does do a lot of great research, some of that research can also be done on the ground in preparation for those long-duration exploration missions to the moon and Mars.
And you can see on your screen, the Dragon spacecraft is now translating forward to that deck that we saw earlier. Again, that deck is the height just below the hatch, which will make it a lot easier for the crew to egress the spacecraft.
And so right before that translation took place, a couple of the recovery team members did do some final safety checks of the spacecraft to ensure that it was safe and ready to go for additional people to approach the spacecraft and to begin those hatch open preparations and operations to get Crew-10 out of the spacecraft and back on Earth. And for those of you who are just joining us, Crew-10 did safely splash down about 40 minutes ago off the coast of San Diego, California, aboard a SpaceX Dragon spacecraft known as Endurance. Endurance did fly on 3 previous missions, Crew-3, Crew-5, and Crew-9. So this was the 4th flight of the Dragon Endurance spacecraft. It launched to the International Space Station about 5 months ago on March 14th from NASA's Kennedy Space Center in Florida. Following that launch, it had a journey to the International Space Station where it was then docked and remained for about 5 months for all of that science and research that Crew-10 conducted. And then yesterday at 3:15 p.m. Pacific, 6:15 p.m. Eastern, Dragon and the Crew-10 crew safely undocked from the International Space Station and made their way back to Earth. They had an about 17.5-hour journey from that undocking until their splashdown, which again took place at 8:33 a.m. Pacific, 11:33 a.m. Eastern today. Crew-10, again, is comprised of NASA astronauts Anne McClain and Nicole Ayers, along with JAXA, or Japan Aerospace Exploration Agency astronaut Takuya Onishi and Roscosmos cosmonaut Kirill Peskov. And so we are now just standing by for the hatch opening of the Endurance spacecraft to welcome the Crew-10.
Stand by for side hatch opening and egress.
So that hatch on the Dragon Endurance spacecraft is now open, and teams are working to get Crew-10 out and back on Earth. Again, they will be initially checked out by a SpaceX medical director. You did just see him go in there a moment ago to make sure that they are feeling okay and are ready to egress or exit the spacecraft.
We are also seeing the recovery crew install that hatch seal protection. This helps protect both the seal of the hatch on the spacecraft as well as the crew as they're exiting the vehicle.
And so that hatch was officially opened at 9:10 a.m. Pacific, 12:10 p.m. Eastern Time, following a splashdown at 8:33 a.m. Pacific, 11:33 a.m. Eastern off the coast of San Diego, California. Again, they are doing some initial medical evaluations, and then they will be prepared to egress or exit the spacecraft and take their first breath of fresh air. Again, they will be assisted out of the spacecraft. That is completely normal. And then from there, they will go just a few steps and to do some additional medical checkouts. And then after the egress is finally complete and all 4 crew members are out of the spacecraft, they will take a helicopter back to dry land. And then from there in California, they will then board a NASA plane and make their way back home to Houston, Texas.
You can see the recovery team again preparing for that egress or exiting the spacecraft. They are using some aids. There's going to be a little bit of a ramp to enable the crew to easily exit the spacecraft. Instead of taking that large step, they can use that ramp to exit.
And recovering the crew is a bit of a joint operation. So we do have team members from NASA's Flight Operations Directorate out there, as well as NASA's Commercial Crew Program, and some flight surgeons from the NASA and international partners that will be prepared to retrieve and receive the crew following their egress or exit from the spacecraft. So it'll be nice to see some familiar faces, friendly faces, as they've worked with all of these teams in preparation for their space flight, and they will be greeting them upon their return.
You can see that the crew is removing some of their cargo that looked like their tablets that they were using to follow along with every procedure throughout the entire mission and ride on Dragon.
And after the crew is extracted or egressed out of the spacecraft, they will remove some additional cargo that's time critical. Often that is cargo that needs to be chilled for whatever reason, scientific samples and such that need to be in a specific environment. So that will be immediately offloaded after the crew exits the spacecraft, and then any additional cargo will be offloaded after it makes its way back to port off the coast of San Diego, California.
Looks like those are the footrests being removed that allow the crew to get out of their seats a little bit easier.
You do see one of those beds or slides that they use to help extract the crew, so we should see some of that egress taking place momentarily.
If you're just now joining us, you are watching the Crew-10 mission as we await the 4 crew members, NASA astronauts Anne McClain and Nicole Ayers, JAXA astronaut Takuya Onishi, and Roscosmos cosmonaut Kirill Peskov, egress the Dragon spacecraft here shortly. They just recently, in the last 10 minutes, were able to take the first breath of fresh air in about 5 months. So we're excited to see them stand with gravity for the first time in 5 months.
And so they will likely be assisted, so we might not see the first steps, but they will be assisted out of the capsule. And it is important to note, since they were under the microgravity environment, their muscles, their bones, all of their systems haven't been exposed to Earth's gravity in over 5 months, which of course has some impacts on the human body, which is some of the important research that is done on the International Space Station to actually see how the human body is affected by the environment of outer space. And so that hatch did open about 6 minutes ago at 9:10 a.m. Pacific, 12:10 p.m. Eastern, following a splashdown at 8:33 a.m. Pacific, 11:33 a.m. Eastern, off the coast of California. Following that splashdown, the recovery team went out to meet the Dragon Endurance spacecraft. First out were the 2 fast boats, which began some safety checks and also began to safe the spacecraft in preparation to be lifted onto the recovery vessel, the Shannon. And the Shannon did arrive to the splashdown location less than 30 minutes after splashdown to then lift the spacecraft up on board the Shannon, and now we're just awaiting the crew to exit or egress the spacecraft. It does look like they are preparing for that crew egress here in just a moment. And the first Crew-10 crew member has now successfully egressed or exited the capsule. And that is NASA astronaut Anne McClain. She looks very excited to be back on Earth, given an arm pump. And the other 3 crew members should be following behind here shortly. So just moments ago, we did have NASA astronaut Anne McClain make her way out of the Dragon Endurance spacecraft, and now we are just standing by for the egress or exit of the following 3 Crew-10 crew members to complete the recovery process. So we are standing by for the egress of NASA astronaut Nicole Ayers, JAXA astronaut Takuya Onishi, and Roscosmonaut Kirill Peskov. And the second Crew-10 crew member has successfully egressed the capsule, and that is NASA astronaut Nicole Ayers. So both NASA astronauts Anne McClain and Nicole Ayers have successfully egressed or exited the capsule. Anne McClain served as the Crew-10 commander, and Nicole Ayers served as the Crew-10 pilot for this mission. So the final 2 crew members that we are awaiting are JAXA astronaut Takuya Onishi and Roscosmos cosmonaut Kirill Peskov. You did just see them removing 2 additional foot restraints, likely preparing to egress the final 2 Crew-10 crew members.
If you're just now joining us, NASA astronauts Anne McClain and Nicole Ayers have already egressed or exited the Dragon Endurance spacecraft. And again, we are waiting for the final 2 Crew-10 members to exit. JAXA astronaut Takuya Onishi and Roscosmos cosmonaut Kirill Peskov are still inside of the Dragon spacecraft.
And so the crew did complete a 148-day mission, with 146 of those days docked to the International Space Station. During that time, they completed more than 2,300 orbits around the Earth, traveling more than 62.7 million statute miles. And NASA astronaut Anne McClain, who was the first to exit the spacecraft, has now totaled 352 total days in space. This was her second space flight. Her previous mission was aboard a Soyuz spacecraft. And then this was the first space flight for NASA astronaut Nicole Ayers, who was the second to exit the spacecraft. So she now has 148 days in space. And we do just now see JAXA astronaut Takuya Onishi has exited the spacecraft. And this was also the second space flight for Onishi. So across his 2 missions, he has now totaled 263 days in space. So we are now just standing by for the final crew member of Crew-10 to make their way out of the spacecraft, and that is Roscosmos cosmonaut Kirill Peskov. To recap a little bit, the Crew-10 mission launched aboard a Falcon 9 rocket inside a Dragon spacecraft, which you're now seeing on your screen. That launch took place from NASA's Kennedy Space Center in Florida on March 14th. The crew then had a journey to the space station and docked shortly thereafter, spending about 5 months attached to the orbiting laboratory, conducting science and research before undocking yesterday, August 8th at 3:15 p.m. Pacific, 6:15 p.m. Eastern, for a 17.5-hour return journey back to Earth, splashing down off the coast of San Diego, California earlier this morning at 8:33 a.m. Pacific, 11:33 a.m. Eastern, which was less than an hour ago. And they are working to egress the final crew member. The initial 3 crew members have already safely exited the spacecraft, and those are NASA astronauts Anne McClain and Nicole Ayers, along with JAXA astronaut Takuya Onishi. So the egress of Roscosmos cosmonaut Kirill Peskov is now underway, and you can see him making his way out of the spacecraft right now. And there you have Roscosmos cosmonaut Kirill Peskov waving as he takes his final or initial steps on Earth. And he will now be taken back to some additional medical checks. And with that, all 4 Crew-10 crew members are safely back on Earth. They have all egress. And so now that NASA astronauts Anne McClain and Nicole Ayers, along with JAXA astronaut Takuya Onishi and Roscosmos cosmonaut Kirill Peskov, are safely back home on planet Earth and getting checked out by the NASA medical team, we are going to go ahead and wrap up our live coverage of their return. After a successful liftoff and separation from Falcon 9 back on March 14th, Crew-10 made their way on board Dragon to the International Space Station and completed a 148-day mission in space. NASA astronauts Anne McClain and Nicole Ayers conducted 1 spacewalk during their 5 months in space on May 1st, relocating a space station communications antenna and the initial mounting bracket installation steps for an IROSA, or International Space Station Rollout Solar Array, that will arrive on a future SpaceX Commercial Resupply Services mission. With their full duration mission coming to an end, the crew began packing up their personal items for their return to Earth about a week ago and worked through tasks and shared lessons learned with Crew 11 teams as they arrived to the space station a few days ago.
Their journey home began when they closed the hatch to Dragon and undocked from the space station at 3:15 p.m. Pacific or 6:15 p.m. Eastern Time on Friday, August 8th. After 4 successful departure burns and a phasing burn to line up their orbit, Anne, Nicole, Takuya, and Kirill rested for a few hours before waking up to prepare for re-entry this morning. Dragon performed an approximately 17.5-minute long deorbit burn to send Dragon on a path home. That burn ended at 7:57 a.m. Pacific Time, 10:57 a.m. Eastern, and this was followed by trunk separation and Dragon's final on-orbit maneuver, closing of the nose cone at 8:02 a.m. Pacific Time, 11:02 a.m. Eastern. The spacecraft re-entered the Earth's atmosphere and slowed its descent with successful deployments of 2 drogue parachutes and 4 mains, with the final splashdown occurring off the coast of San Diego, California at 8:33 a.m. Pacific Time or 11:33 a.m. Eastern. Following that successful splashdown, we saw SpaceX recovery experts move in and prepare Dragon Endurance for its lift on the recovery vessel. And just a little less than an hour following splashdown, we saw Anne, Nicole, Takuya, and Kirill make their way out of Dragon and into the recovery ship's medical facilities safe and sound.
And next up, they'll catch a helicopter flight back to shore while they're transferred to aircraft that will take them home. The astronauts will take a NASA plane for the short flight back to Houston. They'll then be reunited with their families to bring an end to this mission. It's been an honor and privilege to share their journey with all of you as we continue this new era in human spaceflight.
And return today marks the end of the direct handover we executed after successfully launching the Crew-11 mission to the space station just last week on Friday, August 1st. Thank you, as always, for joining us for this morning's coverage of the splashdown of Crew-10. Remember to follow SpaceX on X and NASA online and on social media for updates for the very latest on crew and cargo flights to and from the International Space Station.
And we'll continue to share the progress of Anne McClain, Nicole Ayers, Takuya Onishi, and Kirill Peskov on social media as they travel back home. We will also have a post-splashdown media teleconference coming up at approximately 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern, where leadership will share a final update as we conclude this successful mission. And you can tune in live on NASA's YouTube page and through nasa.gov. From all of us at NASA and SpaceX, thank you for joining us and welcome home, Crew 10.